Hi, my name is Michael Naranjo, and welcome to Real Music Works. Today I'm going to be talking about a band called Glaskas and a second recording that I was involved in, which I believe was their third record, but during their stint with the record label, they released two albums, the first one being Ontmaskerde, and this one, which would be Ontmaskerde, Heldin. It was a complete different experience, I've got to admit. After the band being on the road and they started to write their own songs and everything, there was a whole different approach. So the band would come to me and they sat me down and said, Michael, we really appreciate how you approached the first album, but maybe this time we'd like to have a little bit more say in the arrangement, and we've got ideas that we'd really like to put down. Myself as a producer, I would have to, record some of the demos, played for the label, for the A&R team, which I was also part of the A&R team to the point. And they would decide if the song was going to happen or not. And then they would try and tell me to convince the band to try and change it this way, that way, based on arrangements, and not be double bass drum and none of that heavy metal stuff. So they were trying to get songs on radio. Basically, that's, the corporate takeover has a way of doing things that sometimes, it could be a conflict of interest to the band. And, me and the producer, I find myself in the middle. So going back to the band, telling them after their first little stint at the studio, after we set up the stuff and, playing some of the demos for the new stuff, they were getting pretty excited, but they didn't really want to hear any of the heavy drumming and any of the heavy part of the band. Now, the band, obviously being on tour with their second album being Ontmaskerde, went on tour and they've played, with other big rock and hard bands, and they were, broadening their audience. They were kind of really particular that they really want to call the shots on this one, and I agree. Absolutely, I go where the band goes, and it's my duty to translate it between two speakers. So to cut a long story short, I again went back to the label and said, listen, these guys really want to just drop it and lay it down, and they weren't too very happy about that. I went against A&R's wishes, and I just said to the band, guys, let's go in a room and let's just work the arrangement out for the songs. For the next 3 days, they came back and forth from where they were living. It was about 2 hours or 3 hours away, which, really, these guys were committed. Doing so much commitment and then end up the label telling you that you're not allowed to do what you're supposed to do and how you do it, it's just not going to work. There's just going to be a little bit of friction, a little bit of, every time the band had a break and we go outside and talk, I would have to talk to the band and get them ready, because it was like, I'm trying to really butter them up so that they don't, get into a conflict situation with the record label, because I want to make sure that the band makes a record that surpasses the previous one. And if they are so interested to be more in charge of their own instrumentation and arrangements, how can I say no? For me, that's progress. And for me, a band like this really needs to be let loose. I trusted Dion's songwriting implicitly, and all I basically did was track him and arrange him here and there. And I was getting really excited because I loved what the drummer was doing. The drummer was doing a lot of heavier arrangements and, much thicker beats and a lot more up-tempo here and there, but more, really out there. And it's their generation. How am I going to deny that? So when that was going down, they were listening to some of the songs, and we selectively sent them songs that I knew that they would personally like, and I didn't need to send 3 songs for them to kind of leave me alone with the band in the studio. And then when I would come out and record some of the heavier stuff, the label people would be like, yeah, that's a bit it's a bit loud in this. No, they're just rehearsing, but then, yeah, it's all good, I used to just keep a lid on it. By the time mixing, it was already, I was already finishing up at the label. I had also been recording a band and producing a band called Saving Silence. And it was these two bands that I was doing at the same time in 1 month when I had handed in my resignation papers. 2 weeks notice. This was probably about 6-7 months after my incident of, I was shot and after that, I was given the NI and a sort of a more permanent position inside the label, so not to be out there, but more, hands-on. That never materialized. So it was in that period where I kind of laid it down. I said, listen, I've done all the tracking for the band, everything's done, and Saving Silence, and it's all done, it's finished. So it's Nalda, so it's every other project that I was working on, I've handed it all over. So when I made that announcement, it wasn't, I really could have handled it differently instead of just walking out. But at that point, I hadn't even dealt with the trauma of what had happened with me. I hadn't dealt with the fact that they weren't going to work with my band anymore. One Day Remains was a dead stick, and they expected me to work and carry on doing my thing there. It changed the whole dynamics for me, and the psychology of it changed for me. Here I was putting all this input into other people, which I really didn't mind, but I never knew that I was going to get so deeply involved in being the music producer in the record company, and they would keep me busy. So with Glaskas, once they heard it at the A&R, it was really heavy. Luckily, one of the songs was picked up by a film company who chose to be the title track for the song. So the two leading actors ended up in the video with the band. So it was a huge, a student rock and roll hype, and it did really well. It really moved forward. It did its thing, what it was supposed to do. And I was really happy because they picked the heaviest song on the record. It was it was just like power, and it had a bit of a punk element in it. So it was really, I felt so happy, and the band, I felt it was so justified that they had done that. Whether the record sold as good as the previous one or vice versa, I really can't tell, but I just felt that the growth of the band was more important than the commercial progress that the label was more interested in. I understood that I needed to get an artist song on radio, but there will always be a spot for a really good song, and I believe that particular song was a representation of the capacity and the potential of the band. They remained humble. When they came back in, there was a new bass player, also multi-instrumentalist, great guitarist in his own right, singer-songwriter guy. But they had a different dynamic that I felt was kind of really working for them, and they cut a couple of music videos for the television show, and they did a couple of music videos for broadcasting, and they started touring again. And at that point in time, I felt that, if I had stuck around a little bit longer and maybe renegotiated, but it was just really impossible. I was just logging heads with A&R, and I can only emote and I'm very intuitive. So if I'm not surrounded with this negative energy and constant confrontation of, songs are property and property are songs, and I was told in this period that I'm not to write with no one, only for the record label, and they would choose who I would write with. Granted, I didn't understand what it meant when I signed the record deal with my first band, but this is all changing. I'm producing for the label now, and we're still working with the same deal. So it was just so unpleasant towards the end of my time at the record label that I really, it was a really sour taste for many years. But after that, I kind of put it behind me and carried on and started working on the comeback of what I was trying to do. But working with Glaskas on this record, I felt that I was more behind the glass, and the only time I really hooked it up with them was when we were rehearsing for the first 3 days through the whole record and just working out the arrangements. We, everything was written down. The guys went home and carried on rehearsing. By the time they came back, they laid it down. We set up the drums. Dion was in the studio playing the guitars. Lolka Clausen was, Louis Lolkas was Buddha was a machine. He laid all his drums down, and it was it. A day or two, packed it up, out, and it was Dion and his guitars and the bass. And we played all that down with the bass player. So all of that there was also a huge influence from Ziggy, especially with the orchestration and the final touch, the final mix. Ziggy was the mixing engineer and the final touch guy. Also a greater, after I left, I believe they still carried on with 1 or 2 or 3 songs. to record vocals, redo vocals to fix it up. But Ziggy had really a powerful touch on that record too. So once again, I cannot say that I recorded that or produced it by myself. So that was Glaskas, Ontmaskerde, Heldin, which I believe was more of a true representation of the band and their progress in the earlier part of their career. So don't forget to subscribe and check out our online presence on Instagram and Facebook. And thank you for listening to Real Music Works. And my name is Michael NARANJO, and I'm signing out. So don't forget to check this band out. They're called Glaskas. Glaskas. Take good care of yourself. Nice one.